The sizzle on the flat iron grill cracked like gunfire. Grease popped, the smell of beef cutting through the dust and horse sweat. Around the chuck wagon fire, 5 cowboys watched in rigid silence. None spoke. The steaks were thick, prime cuts for Sunday, but the hands turning them belonged to a Japanese prisoner, a woman, barefoot, wearing a patchy uniform and a bandana to keep the smoke from her eyes. She flipped the steak once, just once. The men stared like something sacred was being defiled. One muttered, "It ain't right." Another spat. None of them moved. 2 days ago, these same men refused to let the POWs near the chuck wagon. Now she stood over the grill with their knives, their matches, their meat. Nobody knew why she was allowed. Nobody had the guts to ask. And then, one cowboy did something that left the others speechless. But to understand what he did, we have to go back. Back to the day she first smelled the fire. The smoke clung to her hair like old shame. Kiyomi knelt beside the blackened iron oven near the edge of the barn, the coarse bristles of her scrub brush digging into her palm. Ash flaked loose and stuck to her sweat-slick neck. Her back ached from hours of leaning into heat and soot, but she didn't stop. Stopping was dangerous. Stopping made you visible. From the other side of the corral, the chuck wagon sizzled to life. The sound cracked through the morning quiet, grease hitting cast iron with a spit and pop that made her flinch. A gust of wind shifted through the yard, catching the scent and carrying it directly to her face. Her jaw clenched. Meat. Real meat. Fat, salt, smoke. Her stomach pulled tight like an angry fist. She hadn't smelled anything like that since her father disappeared and the rice ran out. The chuck wagon grill stood 6 inches off the ground on iron legs, black with decades of seasoning. A seasoned slab of fire-powered authority. It was more than a cooking surface. It was ritual space. The cowboys guarded it like a shrine. No prisoner touched it. No prisoner even got close. The grill hissed again as a thick cut of beef hit the metal, and Kiyomi, still kneeling by her oven, caught a flash of pink turn-brown in the rising steam. She wiped a bead of sweat from her lip with the inside of her wrist, smearing ash across her cheek. The apron they'd given her, American canvas, stiff and scratchy, was already dark with grease and soap. She turned her face away from the wind, but it didn't help. The smell was in her hair now, in her throat. She swallowed hard. A short whistle broke through the morning. 2 cowboys walked past, laughing, boots crunching on gravel. One of them, tall, dust-covered, sleeves rolled to the elbow, carried a tin bowl of coarse salt. He set it down on the prep table beside the grill, then lit a match with his boot heel and bent to feed the fire. The flames flared blue for a moment, then settled into orange licks that danced beneath the iron grate. The sound of beef searing followed instantly. Kiyomi didn't realize she was standing until her shadow fell across the prep table. The salt tin was right there, its rim rusted, its contents glowing white under the rising sun. She reached for it, not even thinking, just drawn forward by something older than rules. A hand slapped the table hard. She froze. The tall cowboy had turned around fast, too fast. His hand hovered inches from hers. His jaw worked for a second before he spoke, like he was trying not to shout. "You don't touch that," he said. Not unkind, but final. Kiyomi dropped her gaze. Her fingers curled inward. She nodded once, slowly, and stepped back. The smell of the meat had gone sour now, replaced with something metallic, almost bloody in her mouth. She backed away until the sun left her shoulders. Then she turned and walked across the yard, the dust puffing beneath her bare steps. She didn't cry. There was no room for that. But the air behind the barn smelled like burning fat, and it made her dizzy. Back at the ovens, she picked up her brush again. Her knuckles were raw where the lye soap had bitten into her skin. She dipped it into the black water, thick with oil and iron flakes, and dragged it across the metal. The sound it made, metal on metal, shrill and scraping, almost drowned out the laughter near the fire. Almost. Later, when the sun had begun to climb and the ranch buzzed with work, she passed the grill again, this time from a distance. The cowboys were still there, the steaks half eaten, juices dripping onto enamel plates. No one looked at her. The tin of salt was gone. The fire beneath the grill had quieted, the coals now glowing red instead of angry orange. She stared at it only once, briefly. The grill, heavy, black, ancient in its authority. She could still feel the heat on her skin. And the line that had been drawn in the dirt? It had never been so clear. The next morning, the chuck wagon fire was already lit before the sun crested the hills. Smoke curled up like black ribbon, thin and deliberate. Kiyomi watched from behind the water trough, her hands submerged in a bucket of cold suds that bit into the cracks of her knuckles. The steel wool scraped against the cast-iron skillet she had been assigned to clean, one of 3 coated with the dried blood and char from yesterday's steaks. From behind her came the familiar scuff of boots on dry dirt. 2 cowboys shuffled past, laughing low, one snapping a towel at the other's thigh. They moved like they belonged, shoulders loose, eyes half-lidded, already chewing on toothpicks, though breakfast hadn't been served. One of them had a thick belt knife dangling from his hip, the handle worn to smoothness. The other carried a brown sack that gave off the scent of raw meat even through the fabric. They stopped at the grill. The metal legs groaned slightly as one of them set a cast-iron grate, down flat across the heat. It had been seasoned for years, black as tar and smooth from 1,000 steaks. The grill sat a few inches higher than the one Kiyomi scrubbed. She glanced over once, just enough to see the sack unfold. Inside, thick cuts of beef, marbled with fat, blood still glistening along the seams. "Prime cuts," the younger one muttered, tossing a slab onto the fire. It landed with a thud, followed by a wet hiss as the juices hit the coals below. A cowboy with a long scar along his jaw stepped up beside them. He leaned forward and adjusted the steak without tongs, using the back of a knife like a priest handling a relic. "She's a fine beast," he said. "Died right, hung long. You can taste that if you know how to read the smoke." Kiyomi's hands kept moving, rhythm now mechanical. Scrub, rinse, stack. The heat from the chuck wagon carried over, prickling her scalp. The smell hit harder today, denser, richer, folded with spices she didn't recognize. Something peppery, something sweet. She turned back to her work, but her breath came faster. She wiped her arm across her forehead, leaving a streak of gray water above her brow. One of the women, older and shorter, passed behind her carrying a box of onions. "Don't look too long," she said in Japanese, not unkindly. "They don't like that." By mid-morning, Kiyomi was down by the trash burn pit, hauling the day's scraps in a dented tin bucket. Flies buzzed around her head as she walked. The air smelled like eggshells, blood, and citrus cleaner. She reached the pit, overturned the bucket, and stepped back. A gust of wind stirred the ash pile, and on top of it she saw it. A slab of steak fat, perfectly white, sliced clean from the meat. Unburned, untouched, it glistened like candle wax in the sun. She bent forward slightly, nose catching its scent, salt, smoke, and animal. Her stomach clenched. Then she saw the scorch marks on the edge where another piece had been tossed. In, blackened, curdled, charred into nothing, her jaw locked tight. Her fingers, already chapped from soap and steel wool, curled against the handle of the bucket, until her nails dug into her palm. She remembered the sound of leather soaking in broth, remembered her brother chewing on his own belt in the corner of a bomb shelter in Nagoya, his hands shaking, his face gray. That smell, burnt meat, had filled the room then, too, only it wasn't from steak. It was from something much worse. A cowboy's voice called out across the yard. "Don't let it flare too high!" More laughter, more knives against metal. Kiyomi turned from the pit and walked back toward the barn. Her steps were deliberate now. The line was still there, etched in the dirt like a scar. She stepped just to the edge of it, and no further. The grill crackled behind her. It kept burning. So did she. Rain fell in slanted lines across the yard, soaking through cotton and canvas like ink through paper. The dirt had turned to sludge, the kind that clung to boots and sucked at your steps. Kiyomi's sleeves were rolled high, the fabric dark and heavy from the downpour. Her breath came in short puffs as she strained to pull a coal sack from the back of the flatbed truck. The burlap was slick with water, the fibers swollen, each breath she took filling her nose with the sharp stink of soaked ash. She braced her knees, pulled again, and the bag finally slid free, too fast. It tumbled from the edge and split open on the ground. The coal hit the mud with soft thuds, chunks bouncing like black teeth. Then a fine powder lifted into the air. The wind caught it and the dust slapped her face. She coughed once. Then again. The grit hit her tongue, bitter, mineral, cold. Her hands rose to wipe it away, but halfway there they stopped. Her nose twitched. It was faint, almost buried in the wetness of the day. But it was there, the smell, wet coal, wood smoke, cold rain on old stone. She blinked once and stared down at her hands. The black dust clung to her fingers, staining the ridges. She rubbed her thumb against her index finger, and the sensation, rough, dry, like crushed shells, triggered something behind her eyes. Another place, another time. Nagoya, a metal drum fire behind her mother's house, broken bricks around it, rice husks smoldering under kindling. Her mother lifting a pot lid and letting out steam scented with barley and dried fish bones, the same coal dust on her apron. Kiyomi inhaled again, slower now. Her chest hitched, her hands trembled, not from cold. She wiped her palms against her skirt, leaving dark streaks that melted in the rain. Behind the kitchen shed there was a rusted barrel used to burn trash. The lid sat tilted. Inside, last week's papers lay half dry, twisted and gray. A few small logs sat to the side, meant for the stove, not yet claimed. She looked around. No one. The rain had kept most inside the bunkhouse or under the porch awning. Even the dogs were quiet. She crouched near the barrel and pulled one of the logs into position. Her fingers moved quickly, but not in panic. In memory. She found a stub of a match, already used once, damp but not ruined. She struck it against the barrel's edge. Once. Twice. Nothing. The third time it flared. She cupped it with both hands, shielding it from the wind, her face glowing orange for just a moment. She touched the flame to the paper, then fed it into the bottom of the pile. Smoke curled instantly, thick, dark, biting at her throat. She reached for the log and placed it carefully on top. The wood snapped as it caught. The flame grew. She leaned forward, feeling the heat on her cheeks. Not hot enough to burn, but close. The smoke rose straight, undisturbed for a second by the wind, and then a footstep behind her, a crunch on gravel softened by the rain. Kiyomi didn't move. She felt the presence before she saw it. A cowboy's shape filled the space beside the shed. Broad shoulders, coat dark from the storm, a hat dripping rainwater. He didn't speak. didn't flinch. He looked at the fire, then at her. His eyes were sunken deep under the brim, unreadable. One hand rested on his hip, thumb hooked through a belt loop. His other hand held nothing, no weapon, no rope, just calloused fingers twitching slightly as if restless. They stood like that for several seconds, rain pattering on the barrel, fire crackling just below. Kiyomi didn't lower her head. She didn't speak either. He stepped closer, looked at the flame, looked again at her soot-covered hands, and then, wordlessly, he turned, walked away. Boots squelched into the wet ground, slow and deliberate. He didn't look back. She sat there long after he vanished behind the barn. Smoke curled around her shoulders, wrapping her in something warmer than fear. The fire hissed as the rain tapped it, and the coal beneath the log began to glow. A memory had been sparked, but something else had too. The clang was sharp, iron on iron, hollow and final. It echoed off the kitchen shed walls and into the still morning air like a cracked bell. Kiyomi turned her head toward the sound just in time to see the cook, red-faced and scowling, slam the handle of a rusted skillet against the edge of the prep table. The pan wobbled, then snapped. A jagged crescent of black metal hung loose at the rim like a broken jawbone. He cursed loudly, then flung the pan toward the firewood stack, where it hit with a thunk and settled crooked in the mud. "Damn thing's older than I am," he spat, wiping his palms down the front of his apron. "Ain't no use now." The line of cowboys near the serving table shifted uncomfortably. A few murmured. One checked his watch. The fire under the grill kept burning, smoke rising like a silent accusation. Beside it, two thick steaks sweated on a wooden board, still raw, their juices puddling under them. The air smelled of garlic and char, but no one moved. Without a clean pan, nothing went forward. Kiyomi stood near the wash basin, her arms streaked with the faded gray of dried soap and iron flakes. Her apron was damp at the hem. She glanced to her right, where a half-dried skillet rested on a towel, a cast-iron piece she had scrubbed early that morning until her wrists ached. It had no rust, no burn, just a soft sheen of oil spread thin across the surface. The handle was warm from the sun through the window, the weight solid and familiar. She picked it up. The metal still held a little moisture at the base, cool against her palm. She stepped forward, boots squishing faintly against the damp straw floor, and approached the table. The cook looked up, wiping his brow with the crook of his arm. His eyes narrowed when he saw her. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Kiyomi extended the pan. He stared at it for a beat too long. It gleamed, not in a polished way, but in the honest shine of work. The kind of clean that came from fingers raw, with scrubbing. He took it without a word, turned it in his hand, and ran his thumb along the base. No grit, no flakes, just smooth iron. A long silence passed between them. Then, just barely, he gave a nod. Not exaggerated, just once, like the tip of a hat, but smaller. Kiyomi stepped back. He turned to the grill, dropped a pat of lard into the skillet. It hit with a slap and began to melt instantly. The fire kissed the bottom, and the fat turned liquid, slick and golden. He grabbed one of the steaks, dropped it into the pan, and the entire kitchen exhaled. Sizzle. The sound was rich, greedy. It rolled into the corners of the space like thunder under oil. The cowboys moved again, leaning forward, hats pushed back. One nudged the other and nodded toward her. "She knows steel," he muttered under his breath. The second man, younger, eyes sharp, didn't look at her. "So what?" he said. The first one shrugged. "So she's not useless?" Kiyomi turned away before they could Say more. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble. She walked back to the basin and picked up another dirty pan, the grime already dried into its corners. Behind her, the fire burned hot. The meat hissed. The skillet she had scrubbed held steady on the grill. Unbroken. Unquestioned. For the first time, her labor had left the shadows. It had entered the fire. By morning, the fire had gone out. The skillet was back on the rack, clean, still warm, its surface now dark with the thin sheen of lard baked into the grain. The air was sharp with the bite of frost, the first of the season. Thin ice crackled underfoot as Kiyomi stepped out of the barn, her breath curling in front of her like cigarette smoke. They were burying potatoes. The order came with no explanation. The frost had ruined most of the late harvest bin. The cook didn't trust them to keep. "Spongy," he grunted, "half rotten already." A rusted wheelbarrow overflowed with misshapen lumps, brown skin peeling in places, black spots blooming like bruises. Two of the older women hauled them out past the fence line, one sack at a time, to dig shallow graves in the hard dirt. Kiyomi was told to sweep the storage shed, but she lingered. Near the bottom of the pile, hidden under half a burlap sack, she found 3 smaller ones, firm, untouched. One still had a strand of dirt-covered root clinging to its tail. She weighed them in her hand, each no bigger than her fist, but solid, real. She slipped them under her apron, one in each pocket, one in her palm. That night, the fog rolled in off the hills, thick as wool. It settled low, swirling at ankle height, swallowing the bottom of the fence posts. The stars disappeared behind a silver veil. Only the barn light flickered dim through the haze. The world turned quiet and soft around the edges. Kiyomi waited until the mess hall emptied. Boots scraped, doors latched. Laughter faded into snoring. Then she crept around the back of the kitchen shed, past the broken rain barrel and the stack of kindling left to dry. A rusted iron pit sat half buried in the dirt, a trash fire base used to burn packaging and bones. Its edges were ringed with soot, and the ash inside still held a whisper of heat. She knelt beside it, brushing back her sleeves. One by one, she buried the potatoes in the ash, turning the embers with a stick until they glowed faintly. The wood was dry. The smoke rose in slow coils, blue, thin, and almost sweet. She sat cross-legged beside the pit, arms tucked under her knees, waiting. The smell reached her first, starch and skin, then salt, then something earthy and warm. Her mother's hands had smelled like that after tending the steel drum in the alley behind their house. She reached in with a piece of cloth wrapped around her hand and pulled the first one free. The skin blistered, papery and dark. She cracked it open on her knee. Steam burst out and the inside was golden, soft, collapsing into itself. She bit in. The heat flooded her mouth, creamy, sweet, dusted with the memory of home. A twig snapped. She froze. A shape emerged from the fog, tall, broad, a shadow wearing a cowboy hat. He stopped a few feet away, boots crunching softly on frost. She didn't move. The man sniffed once. Then again. He didn't speak. After a moment he crouched beside her. The fire cast, orange across his face, leathered skin, stubble, gray in his mustache. He looked down at the pit, then at the potatoes, then at her. She offered one. He took it without a word, broke it open with thick fingers. Steam curled into the fog. He ate it, slowly, deliberately. His chewing stopped. His eyes flicked toward her, not hard, not soft, just different. Then he stood, nodded once, and walked back into the fog. She stayed until the last ember blinked out. In the morning, a single potato sat on the crate outside the barn, clean, fresh, wrapped in a square of wax paper. She didn't need to ask where it came from. The smoke still clung to her sleeves. And now, someone else knew the taste. The next morning the smoke was gone, but something else lingered. The frost had hardened the dirt into brittle plates, and boots cracked them like pottery as the ranch came to life. Near the corral, the chuck wagon stood still and cold, a rare silence settling around it like something sacred had been broken. No steak sizzled, no lard hissed, no scent of char or salt curled into the wind. The grill was dead. The cook was gone, called off to town for supplies. He'd left at dawn with a list, a half-empty flask, and a growl that promised he'd be back before supper. But by mid-morning the fire had guttered out. Grease had gummed the burners. The starter grate stuck in place. Smoke sputtered from the wrong end of the pipe, thick and gray, like something was choking beneath the metal. The cowboys stood nearby, watching the mess pile up. Plates clattered, voices rose. Half the beef's still raw. "We ain't eatin' it cold." "Where the hell's Jasper?" one man kicked, the edge of the wheel well with the heel of his boot. Another fiddled with the flint box, flicking sparks that refused to catch. Flames puffed and died again, smothered by trapped air and fat that had soaked into the belly of the wagon. That's when he stepped forward, the oldest cowboy on the ranch, the one with the faded denim coat and the sun-dried face like river stone. His limp was slight but permanent, his hat low enough to shade most of his expression. He looked at the grill, then at the smoke, then, without turning, he pointed across the yard. Her. Kiyomi had been scraping charred bits off the back of a baking pan near the pump house. She looked up when he called. "You," he said, voice low but solid. "Can you light this?" Everything stopped. Someone snorted. Another muttered under his breath. But no one said no. She set the scraper down, walked toward the grill. The metal was warm beneath her hands, residual heat trapped under layers of old grease. She reached for the great release, then paused, glanced at the cowboy. He nodded once. That was all she needed. Kiyomi crouched. She found the intake vents beneath the wagon, felt the stiffness in the draw line, twisted it gently until it moved freely. Her fingers slid into the soot-caked edge, brushing past a curled scrap of charred parchment. She cleaned the vent with a rag first, dry, sharp-smelling. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a match she'd saved. A real one. American. Sulphur-tipped, clean wood stem, not yet water-warped. She struck it on the iron wheelbase. It flared, steady and hot, casting her face in copper light. The cowboys leaned forward, watching. She didn't flinch. She used the match to light a twist of paper, then tucked it under the woodpile in the starter box. She opened the air slot just wide enough to draw breath. The flames climbed. The grease hissed. The grill bucked once, like a metal beast waking up, and then heat roared through the pipes, sharp and sudden. Smoke curled, blue and clean this time. Kiyomi stepped back slowly. The fire held. The old cowboy studied her for a beat, then nodded again. His approval was quieter than his words. Behind him, one of the younger men whispered, "Did she just—" Another answered, "I think she fixed it." They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just watched. Because what they had seen wasn't defiance. It was control. Calm and fire. The coals were breathing steady now, low and red, pulsing under the iron like the heartbeat of something alive. The grill grumbled with heat. The air above it shimmered, the distortion bending sunlight like glass held over a flame. The old cowboy didn't speak. He just opened the cooler lid behind the wagon and pulled out a cut wrapped in parchment. It dripped faintly, a trail of pink water streaking down the side of the box. He peeled the paper away and held it out in both hands, one thick slab of raw ribeye, trimmed but heavy with fat. The marbling laced through the flesh like ivory veins. He extended it toward her. Kiyomi reached out, bare hands. She hesitated just a breath before contact, then accepted the weight. It was cold, not icy, just chilled, dense with moisture, slightly tacky against her fingers. The fat at the edge was solid but soft, like soap left in a dish too long. A bead of blood rolled over her knuckle and disappeared into her sleeve. She didn't flinch. She stepped forward, centered herself in front of the grill, and stared down into the glowing iron. One breath in. She placed the steak. The sound split the air. A crackling, immediate burst, fat meeting fire, hissing in protest. The meat seared fast, its edge curling up almost imperceptibly. Smoke curled around her wrists. The scent hit her throat, rich, animal, layered with black pepper and something sweeter. Tallow, maybe, or rosemary from the oil bucket. She held still, hands hovering, eyes scanning the edges of the cut. She didn't press it, didn't poke, just watched. The grill hissed again. The steak blistered lightly, edges darkening from pink to gold to chestnut. Then she reached for the tongs. Not the ones the cook used, the big silver ones with the bent handle, but the older set, short, scarred at the joint. She had cleaned them herself 3 days ago, scrubbing off a month's worth of grime until the rust flaked free and the metal underneath showed through like old bone. She slid them under the edge, paused, and flipped. One motion, confident, precise. The steak turned in the air and landed flat with a slap. Smoke erupted, whiter this time, sharper in the nose. The fat cap sizzled at the edge, dripping onto the coals and flaring orange. A murmur behind her. Boots scuffed, gravel shifted. She kept her back straight. She adjusted the placement of the steak, not by spinning it, but by dragging it half an inch toward the hot spot on the far left side where the grill lines burned deepest. A trick the old cook used. She'd watched, memorized. The cowboy who had handed her the meat stood just behind her shoulder, arms folded. His breath steamed faintly in the cold. Then someone else stepped forward. A younger one, slim, clean-shaven. He reached for the ceramic plate set near the cutting board, picked it up. He moved toward her, expectant. Kiyomi tensed just slightly. He hesitated, right at the edge of the fire. His boots stopped on the line, between the prep area and the grill. He looked at the steak, at her hands, at the tongs, still glistening with oil. Then he lowered the plate, didn't speak, didn't take the steak. He stepped back, not out of defiance, out of deference. Something had shifted, not in the fire, in them. She was still holding the tongs, and her hands were slick with tallow. She placed the steak on the ceramic plate, careful not to smear the edges. The juices had pooled around the base, dark and glossy, flecked with tiny black sear marks. The fat had crisped into a perfect rim, crackling golden brown, no char, just a delicate blistering that promised flavor in every bite. She laid the tongs down beside the grill and stepped back. No one moved. The plate sat alone on the cutting board. A curl of steam lifted off the meat, twisting up into the dry morning air. It mixed with the faint scent of sagebrush and coal ash. The fire behind her still whispered, crackling soft beneath the grates, but all the voices had gone silent. 1 minute passed, 2. Boots shifted in gravel. A crow called once, then was swallowed by the stillness. Then a chair scraped. It was the man who'd hesitated the day before, the young one with the clean jaw and nervous hands. He stepped forward, picked up the plate. He didn't say a word. He walked over to the mess bench, pulled it, out, and sat down alone at the far end, just beneath the hanging tin cups that clinked faintly in the breeze. The bench creaked under his weight. He reached for a fork, not the big camp utensil, but one of the old bent ones with a missing tine. Standard, utilitarian, a ranch fork. He pierced the steak with slow precision. A single cut. The meat gave way easily, revealing a warm pink center, medium rare. He brought the bite to his mouth and chewed. Once, twice, 3 times. He swallowed. Silence. Then he set the fork down, palms flat on the table, and clapped. Once, loud, then again, twice. A third time. No smile, no grin, just the sharp rhythm of approval. Solid, intentional. The sound rang out across the yard. Another cowboy stepped forward, this one older, rounder. He picked up the same fork, sliced a clean edge from the other side of the steak, and lifted it with his fingers. He didn't sit, just chewed right there, watching her. He nodded. Behind him, someone let out a breath through their nose, a half laugh, half gasp, then shouldered forward to grab another plate. In less than a minute, the men were moving again. Not rushing, not jostling, but deliberate. Quiet like a church line, as if they weren't just eating lunch, but participating in something heavier. The grill hissed as Kiyomi laid down a second steak, then a third, each one placed with care, tongs guided not just by experience now, but by expectation. The old cowboy, silent since the morning before, stood off to the side with his arms folded, watching everything. His hat shadowed most of his face, but not his mouth. He was smiling, not wide, but enough. Kiyomi's hands moved with rhythm now, not rushed, but fluid. The tallow had baked into the lines of her palms. Her sleeves were damp from steam, her nails black at the edges from coal dust that wouldn't come clean. But the fire was open. The grill no longer belonged to one man, or to America, or to rules written down in spit and pride. It had been shared, and the proof was in the bite, the first one that cracked the silence. The bite that echoed in boots shifting, in benches scraping, in forks rising. The bite that burned old rules down and salted the ground beneath them. No one said it, but they all knew it. She had fed them, and now they were hungry for more. The morning broke quiet. Frost glittered on the edges of the bunkhouse window, tracing spiderwebs of silver across the glass. Somewhere outside, a cow bellowed low and slow, a sound that echoed between the hills like a warning or a hymn. Kiyomi sat up on her cot, blanket still clutched in her hands, when she saw it, folded neatly on top of the footlocker, a square of soft white cloth, a clean apron, not military issue, not the coarse khaki ones with fraying seams they used for potato duty. This one was linen, real linen, pale as bone, stitched tight. Along the neckline, just beneath the top seam, someone had sewn a single line of thread. Red. It wasn't neat, no machine stitching, but careful. Done by hand, no note, no explanation. Kiyomi ran her fingers across the fabric. It was smooth. The edge still carried the faint scent of cedar, as if it had been stored in a chest, far from dirt or grease or ash. She stood slowly, slid the apron over her shoulders. The tie wrapped twice around her waist. She knotted it in front. The red thread sat over her sternum like a badge. Outside, the fire had already been lit. Smoke climbed in slow columns through the cold, curling toward a sky still the color of pewter. The chuck wagon grill popped once, a sharp crack as fat from the early sausages hit the coals. Cast iron lids clanged in the distance. She stepped out into the yard. Boots crunched over frost-hardened dirt. The wind carried the smell of ash and raw onions, strong and sharp, making her eyes prickle as she approached. No one called out. No one blocked her path. She walked straight toward the fire. The cowboy who had clapped, the first one, stood by the prep bench with a towel slung over his shoulder. He looked up once, squinting into the morning light. Then he saw her. He didn't smile, just nodded. Once. She nodded back. Then she stepped into position. No hesitation. She reached for the same set of tongs she had used days before, the scarred ones with the bent hinge, still warm from the morning cook. The heat from the grill hit her thighs as she stepped in closer. She adjusted the grates without being told. The fire accepted her. It wasn't a test now. It wasn't a gamble or a violation of code. It was communion, a rhythm. The apron shifted against her body as she moved, whipping slightly in the breeze. The linen soaked in the smoke, the fabric growing heavier by the minute, streaked with the scent of sear and sizzle and rendered tallow. Behind her, a sound, peeling. She turned slightly, just enough to glimpse the other POW women standing by the root bins. One of them, a Kiko, had taken a knife. She held an onion in her left palm, blade steady in her right. She peeled slowly, fingers stained already with the sting of acid. The scent sliced into the air. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Another girl stepped forward and knelt by the crate of carrots. There were no orders, no permissions, just movement, silent, deliberate, and shared. The fire crackled louder, not from heat, but from weight, the weight of history bending just slightly toward something new. The physical anchor had shifted once more, from a thing guarded to a thing offered, from weapon to warmth, from line to table. And Kiyomi? She wore the change on her chest, stitched in red, over white, against flame. The morning wind rustled the yellowed mesquite leaves, sending them skittering across the yard like dry bones in a whispering dance. The sky was the color of faded denim, streaked with the thin charcoal plume rising from the chuck wagon's firebox. Kiyomi stood alone at the grill, sleeves rolled to her elbows, apron stained now with use, onion juice, rendered fat, coal soot along the hem. The red stitching had darkened with smoke, but the thread still held. The ranch was quiet. Sunday quiet. No barked orders, no boots thudding against the porch planks, just wind and flame and the sharp metallic clink of the tongs in her hand. She turned a ribeye. The meat hissed as its edge kissed the steel. She brushed it gently with a mop soaked in vinegar, tallow, and crushed garlic. The scent rose into the cold air, layered and deep, like an offering. Then, boots, slow and deliberate, crunching over frost-dusted gravel. A shadow stretched long beside her. She didn't flinch. A cowboy stepped up, older, taller, dust still clinging to the cuffs of his trousers. From his belt he pulled a knife, not just any knife, the same bone-handled blade she had seen him use 3 mornings ago to slice a smoked brisket with surgical precision. He held it out. "Yours now," he said. She looked at it. The handle was worn smooth from years of grip. The blade bore tiny nicks along the edge, the kind that told stories of camps, of cattle, of long nights and longer rides. She reached out and took it, careful to wrap her fingers around the bone without touching the blade. It was warm from his hip, heavy in a way that surprised her. The cowboy nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the barn, leaving only the silence between them. She placed the knife beside the grill, not on the prep board, not hidden, but displayed, like a shrine, and then she kept cooking. Her hands moved with confidence now, not defiance. She salted each cut with deliberate pinches like her mother used to. 3 fingers from a height, never shaking. She tasted the broth with a spoon held to the steam, eyes half closed, checking for balance. She tended the fire like a heartbeat. Across the yard, the other POW women watched. One brought peeled onions, another cleaned the potatoes with a horsebrush, laughing quietly when the skin came off in satisfying curls. Nobody gave orders. They didn't need to. The fire had been a gate, a line in ash, drawn by years of ritual and pride. But now it was a table. And around it, trust simmered with the same heat that once kept her out. The cowboy who clapped that first time, the young one with the steady jaw. Turns out he wasn't just another ranch hand. He was the foreman, the man who set the rules, the man who changed them with a single sound, a clap. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't written a memo, he just clapped. And the rules, unwritten, unspoken, but enforced like steel, shifted with it. Now, the grill that once shut her out had become the altar she served from. The fire that once burned in warning now warmed everyone. The ranch didn't say it, but it knew it. The fire belonged to her, too. And by belonging to her, it now belonged to everyone. If this story moved you, please like the video and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps preserve forgotten stories like this one and helps us pass them on.